Welcome to MT Mindfulness Podcast. Today, I have the honor of having Daron Larson. Daron Larson is a mindfulness coach with over 21 years of experience. He uses his attentional framework to offer personalized guidance to individuals, small groups, and organizations worldwide. His TED Talk, Don't Try to Be Mindful, has been viewed 600,000 times. Daron's approach emphasizes taking ownership of one's mental strength and emotional agility, leading to a more satisfying relationship with life. So, thank you for joining me, Daron.
Well, thanks for having me, Bob. I'm excited to talk to you. Yeah, for sure.
So, Daron, can you tell me a bit about yourself and your childhood, growing up, and your journey to mindfulness and meditation?
So I think I've always been I was always a curious kid. I was interested in puzzles. I think of myself as kind of a naive kid, and I was infatuated with teachers and things like origami and cracking codes and magic tricks and I actually lived in Wichita, Kansas, grew up in the 70s, my childhood in the 70s, and we had it seems like it's not true. We had a magic store and a science store within walking distance of my house, which wouldn't be the first thing people would think about Kansas, kind of known for being, I don't know, old-fashioned and stodgy. But anyway, puzzles. I feel like I was energized by puzzles. As a grade school student, I would write poems. I was also very involved in the Baptist church. So I was raised in the Baptist church, and even there, I was fascinated by things like just the stories from Sunday school lessons or vacation Bible school and the music. And somebody would play the piano, and I would say, "Show me how to do that." And then I would insist on piano lessons. So I was that kind of a kid. I was the kid you wanted in your class who would get his homework done and do the art projects and then tutor the other kids. And I was even like a library assistant in grade school, and I would thread the film projectors for teachers in other classrooms. So I was very curious and observant and hungry for puzzles and stimulation.
Was it innate, this curiosity, or was there influences from siblings or parents?
It definitely wasn't from my family, and in fact, I kind of frame it at this point in my life that the house was a little bit dry and boring, but school was exciting and church was exciting, and there was enthusiasm and support from teachers. So teachers and libraries, but yeah, I was just stimulated. I don't know exactly where that comes from, but I do attribute it to teachers.
Was there certain books you read which kind of nudged you that way?
The first thing that comes to mind, I remember the Phantom Toll Booth being something I would get lost in for the puns and the kind of otherworldly scenarios. I always loved satire. That's so funny. From childhood, I loved these things, the satire, the satirical, the not quite literal view, which was kind of in contrast to this, in the fundamentalist Christian upbringing was very literalist. But I want to say, since I have a chance to, I rarely get to talk about this, so it's such a treat. You have to slow me down. I was always questioning everything, and I was aware when I was very young that I was asking questions that you weren't supposed to ask about, if there was something about salvation or about a story from the Bible, and I would ask a question, I would ask about Jesus's Jewish background, and it would make people very uncomfortable. And I didn't find that kind of resistance in the public school system. So it was just interesting. But sometimes when, if you tell your bio in high level, I was raised in the Baptist church in Kansas, it seems like I was just swallowing it all whole. I was infatuated by it, but I was always questioning, and I've brought that to me with everything I've explored in my life since.
And is that a more in a kind of a curiosity level, or was there something more innate deep down that prompted that? Does that question
I,
make
I
sense?
I think the question makes sense. I don't know. I think it's something about I was aware when I was up against a big audacious claim about, if you'd ask who created the world or what happens after we die, and people would answer with such confidence, but I was aware that they wouldn't be able to really answer with much specificity or clarity, and there was a lot of dodging the question, which I find interesting looking back. Or adults being visibly uncomfortable with being asked a big question that maybe they hadn't thought of. And I don't know where that came from. I call it naive, but I don't think that's entirely fair. Naive in that I really want this to be true. Please tell me more. That kind of, if this is really what you claim, give me some more proof, or give me some evidence, or give me some way to find. Yeah, I found that I was running into this thing no matter what I was interested in: playing the ukulele, doing a magic trick, learning to do ventriloquism, origami. I would notice that there were steps a person could take. But once you started heading in a direction of any of these skill development things, you would bump into, it was hard. And I realized that, oh, wait, there's nothing I can pursue that doesn't have this little speed bump or like a rite of passage or initiation, where if I'm not willing to be uncomfortable while I'm learning a certain thing, I felt like I was really interested in what does it take to work past those obstacles, because it seemed that people talk all the time in really simple ways, confident ways, but I saw less evidence of people actually mastering something or working past something. I'm trying to think of a specific example. I just remember, for some reason, not that I ever stuck to it, but I was fascinated by ventriloquism, and I realized there's no way to do this. The little book would say, there's certain sounds that are made by the lips coming together, so you have to come up with a workaround to do that. And I would try it for a while. I thought, oh my gosh, this is so hard. So I would have a deep appreciation, but I would say, this isn't something I want to invest more time in. But now the piano, I, for some reason, really took that on as a challenge that was a big part of my growing up years, from second grade through up until my first year of college. So challenging puzzles where I'm testing the limits of what people claim to be available. I don't know where it came from. I also think I was encouraged by teachers, and this I don't know how to be objective about, but if a teacher would introduce a subject, I would just dive in. And I think, by contrast to the students around me, the teachers were so thrilled that I got lots of praise for, we would read a play in a book in grade school, and I would insist we have to perform this, and then it would inspire me to write a play or something like this. So I really wanted to get into the thick of things, and I was surrounded by other students who I always thought, for some reason, didn't seem to share that curiosity. So yeah, I don't know.
So it also sounded like you had an innate ability to kind of get absorbed into that subject,
I think that's fair. Yeah, it's like enough taste of pushing through to get absorbed. Yeah, I think that's right. It's like the experience of pushing through and developing a little bit of familiarity, or just enough mastery that it got noticed from people. I do think that's.
So you were doing CCNE.
Totally, and I think especially, which is why the equanimity piece, when I came across that, we can save this for circle back to it. But I've never heard it described in such a relatable way that I continue to think is an undervalued attentional skill. That it really does. People give up when it's uncomfortable instead of finding a way to be more comfortable with that discomfort. And I think that's a key to so many things. So
so just for the audience who don't know what we're talking about in terms of CCNE, what I mean is CCNE is an acronym for concentration, sensory clarity, and equanimity. So it's a short term for that. so from that childhood, that curiosity, that focus, and being absorbed in activity, did that? I'm guessing that continued in your teens, and then to
we moved when I was before I went into my middle school years, and that I think was a big setback, like socially, and I had to start over making friends and things. So then my exploration became more private and more independent and less supported. So there's a bit of a dry spell in there. But what I do remember about that time is I was always reading books. What's yoga? I remember doing. I was babysitting, and someone had what's the book? Be Here Now, and it seemed very exotic, and it seemed to have the answers to. It had answers to deep questions, but I didn't even understand the questions. But it seemed, whoa, and so I would go. The library has been a huge thing for me, but it would be like, as much as I learned, go to the library. There's all these books on origami. Okay, yoga, dreams, dream interpretation, lucid dreaming. I would just gobble these things up for some reason. I don't know. I think it was wanting to be stimulated, but also wanting to really test some of these things out for myself. Is it possible to wake up in the middle of a dream and realize you're dreaming? Is it possible to relax deeply and that stuff? I would have to say there is a big chunk here where the fundamentalist upbringing was very much warning against exploring such things. So I did reach a point where I would keep it clandestine and make sure no one knew I was relaxing. I'm trying to remember one of the first times I did a relaxation exercise using a cassette tape, and I felt like I was really doing something I wasn't supposed to be doing, and
yes.
and even when I look back on that, partly the message came from the Baptist church that you're opening up a dangerous doorway into something demonic or something, but also the way that meditation came couched in something that was in contrast to my own culture, or in the same way it would have this, the way magic had this allure. It would be in I want to say not regalia, but it would come come packaged in a mystique that there's something esoteric or forbidden or unusual about. Come try this out. So on the one hand, my church is saying, be careful, this is not safe. And then the other hand, people are saying, come on, it's not safe. There was an interesting tension at play there. And I don't know. This is a funny thing, Bob, because I think, I'm old enough now that people keep discovering things that I was curious about, like in the 70s, and it feels weird. It makes me feel old. I'm like, oh gosh, like I already went down the path of, lucid dreaming and dream journals and all this stuff. So, partly why was so excited to discover Shinzen Young's approach, as I found it was so grounded in practicality and real life application, and demystifying, if anything, demystifying things. So it really opened a lot of significant doors for me.
I understand exactly. Having swim in the spiritual waters for a while, you come across all types of. I'm trying to not use the BS word, but nonsensical stuff and a lot of rubbish that's out there. So, having come across Shinzen Young's work, where it strips all that paraphernalia away, and what are the essential ingredients here? What are we doing? What are we working on? And I think that's what I found refreshing about it.
Absolutely, yeah.
When did you come across that?
So I would say that to set up meeting Shinzen, I would say that I dabbled in all these things for years, right? And then I was a music major in college, and that didn't go well. It didn't feel like a good fit. I ended up getting a degree in social work, working in the field of mental health. And then you kind of have to fast forward a few years. There's a lot of life stuff, which I'm happy to go into, but it might be outside the scope of what we're talking about today. But going down this path of mental health support worker, case manager. I did child abuse investigations, and I worked in a psychiatric hospital and worked with chronically mentally ill people. I found myself putting all my energy into helping other people as a profession, and really in my personal life to some degree. And sort of realizing I was tapping out my capacity. There was a thing we would say in the mental health world at that time, and I hope it's changed by now, but every few months we would have to have our clients' goals. What's your clients' goals that you're working together? And between you and me, they didn't have goals. The organization had goals for them, but my clients were like assigned to me, and they were just like, take me to the grocery store, help me do this and do that. So they didn't frame it the way we framed it. But one of the first goals we would say, and it was like, became a joke to me. Everybody's goal was my goal, not their goal, but it was client will gain insight. And what we meant by that is client will admit that they have something they should be working on. Admit that they have depression or schizophrenia or bipolar, or, to have any insight at all into their own predicament so that we can start coming up with their goals. But 10 years into my work in mental health, and for a while I was full-time case manager, and then I was, in order to pay my bills, because it didn't pay well, I had 12-hour shifts at a crisis center every other weekend. The weekends I didn't have my daughter, who was really young at that time, and I was living in a new place. Anyway, I was tapped out. It was like all my energy is going to support others who aren't invested really in their own. So I stumbled naively into a yoga class before yoga became what it is now. And I feel very lucky that there has happened to be this remarkable, very, what would I say, practical, in the same way the Shinzen's approach, it wasn't self-promotion, it wasn't ego, it was really encouraging curiosity of body awareness. And I dabbled in that every other week for a while, and then every week, and then I would leave and come back for years. She pointed me to John Kabat-Zinn's "Wherever You Go, There You Are," which I feel like is a big turning point for me. And then I got a subscription to the Yoga Journal back then, and I found almost none of it relevant or interesting, except Phil Moffitt wrote a column, and I don't even think it was every issue. And I would read his column, and it's wisdom. It was practical wisdom, I would call it. And I would read one, and I think, okay, wait a minute. I could take this idea. Like, I remember one of the ideas being something like, does it ever feel like it's like you're the star of a movie, like it's all about you and everyone else is just extras and whatever? What if you just noticed this? And I remember thinking, oh my God, number one, yes, that's totally relatable. And this would give me something to play with for months or years, as opposed to hold this yoga pose. So I had a chance to go on a silent retreat in the fall of 2002, led by Phil Moffitt, for 4 days. And I have to say, I did not know at all what I was signing up for. I did not know what to expect at all. And I'm so glad that I did it, because I was completely confused and overwhelmed and exhilarated, and it felt like, get me out of here, and catharsis, and I don't want to leave here, all these things in 4 days. And my daily meditation practice was launched at that point. I think everything else was like, I call it dabbling, but I think it was really preliminary work to be able to commit to a daily practice at that point. And partly because Phillip Moffitt said, in my little short interview with him, he asked me something about what was working. And I said, when nothing else works, I'll do loving kindness to get through until the bell rings or whatever. And he said, well, what you could do is do 5 minutes of loving kindness as part of your daily meditation practice. Try that for a couple of years and see if you notice any impact. And I thought to myself, okay, I don't have a daily meditation practice. I've come from the field of mental health where I've never heard of a trial run of 2 years for any kind of personal growth experiment. And I thought that is either the craziest thing or the most insightful thing anyone's ever suggested to me. So kind of a literal person. I put it on my calendar, 2 years from this date. And I want to say that, share that story, because I think what that allowed me to do is to postpone evaluating the worth of my practice. Instead of, I think what I see in the world a lot right now is people try something once and find it not to be what they thought it was going to be, or they think they are incapable of mindfulness meditation, after 1 or 2, 3 days. And I feel very lucky to just sort of have put the evaluation far enough into the future that I was able to, before I needed to evaluate it, it started to appear. The value bubbled up without me having to evaluate it. So I feel very lucky. He told everybody you should join sitting groups in your home community. So as soon as I get home, I'm a good student. I go find a sitting group. Yeah. And one of the sitting groups I tried, they were talking about this weird teacher from California who was Jewish and spoke Japanese and whatever, and spoke different languages. And they said, he's very weird. I don't know. They said he does this thing where people will be meditating and they're wearing headphones, and he'll ask them questions while they're meditating and he'll suggest things. Isn't that weird? And I'm like, I need to know who this is. I thought it sounded like a brilliant idea to ask somebody about their subjective experience of meditation in the midst of the practice. Yeah. I just thought, wait a minute, everyone should be doing, why are we not doing this? So anyway, my next retreat was with Shinzen, and then it was like, I was hooked, and that was every year from then on, while we were still getting together in person,
Yeah. So with Phil, the 10 minutes loving kindness practice, was there a tipping point where you start to notice the bubbling, or was it retrospective? What was the experience?
Yeah, the experience was visceral in the moment. First with things that were low stakes. Like I remember I had a job interview. I borrowed a leather portfolio to take to this job interview to look fancier, to look like I had my act together. Anyway, I took the bus, and then anyway, it's funny because I don't even remember what the job interview was for. I must not have gotten it, but now this story makes more sense if you know. At this point still, I would say I was in the phase of my life where I would say I was in touch with my feelings, which when I look back, I have to laugh because not at all, but I had strong feelings that drove my behavior. And I would really spiral over emotional things. So I could be really stuck in rumination and looping and coming down harder on myself, right? In ordinary life situations, especially work-related things. So anyway, I get off the bus and I'm walking home, and I realize I don't have this borrowed fancy leather portfolio in my hands, which means it's like off on the bus and gone forever. And so I was walking, and I'm like, oh, whoops. Let's see. I wonder if the bus must go in a big loop, and I can just go, I kind of need to see. There's probably not going to be anyone who answers the phone if I call. So I'm just going to walk back to the bus stop. And it reminded me of on retreat with Shinzen, how you have an appointment time, and he would just say, meditate till I get there. And I'm like, wait a minute. So I was basically like, I was just watching my mind generate scenarios. Stakes were pretty low, right? However, it was viscerally not miserable. I was not a pinball in a pinball machine. I was not at the mercy of an escalation of fear or embarrassment. I was just like, bus goes in a loop. I could walk over to the bus stop and wait as long as it takes. The bus pulls up. I ask, can I go back to the seat? And he's like, I don't care. The bus driver doesn't care. And I'm sure it won't be there, but I walk back and I pick it up and I walk back and I just head home. And I realized that instead of a story about being mindlessly forgetting something, it was a story about viscerally experiencing what it was like to observe myself, and not just dive into escalation and panic or spiraling or self-judgment. And it was one of the things I kind of stopped in my tracks. I'm like, wait a minute, this is not from nothing. This, in the same way, it reminds me of how, if you've ever done any weightlifting, like you're doing squats, let's say, and it's like, oh my God, this is miserable. Why am I doing this? And then you find yourself taking stairs or doing something and you're like, oh my God, my legs feel strong. And it's like, it's because of the work I put in, I'm now feeling the literal benefit. And to me, this was the equivalent of, I feel the benefit of observing myself in a moment of discomfort. And it really took my breath away. And so, since then I've had much more like Oprah worthy moments of that kind of phenomenon, which I'm always a little bit cautious, because I feel like when we talk about mindfulness, especially these breakthrough moments, they start to make people feel less than, you know what I mean? People feel like, how do I have something like that? But I've had,
how can I have some of that?
Yeah, how do I have some of that?
How can
Exactly.
I have some of
that? and the funny thing is, of course, as you know, it's not, number one, it's not on demand. I wish it were. So it's sometimes it's very spontaneous. And what I have found is, the more just obvious this is the evidence of my practice, and I can't believe this is even humanly possible. I can't believe more people are not talking about this. And something about the situation that reveals this just remarkable power, I would not wish on anyone. So it's like grief, or waiting for someone in an emergency room, or a situation with my daughter when she was a teenager that was, to me, kind of a terrifying moment. I thought, I can't. These things have turned into my most valued memories, but they were horrible situations to have to face. Yeah. So
can I ask a bit more about, with the tram and the folder?
Yeah.
Were you experiencing the emotions as well as a thought?
At this point, this would have been maybe just 2 or 3 months into my daily meditation practice, and it was more of a vague, visceral awareness but it was not any kind of specificity that I would later learn to cultivate with Shinzen.
Would you say that in that experience you kind of dropped into equanimity? So
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
And then it was almost like recognizing the impact of that equanimity after the fact, and not really having words for that at that time yet.
Yeah.
Which is so cool.
So and I totally agree. As you can see, I'm getting smiles because it was the same with me. Looking back because like the term equanimity, looking back, then I can see, that was an experience of equanimity, but at that time there was no word for that experience.
Yeah. Right.
So yeah, I think I might have to elucidate date. So I'm gonna pass that job to you, Daron, because we'll probably need to define or give people an idea of what do we mean by equanimity. How do you, when you're teaching and when you're with people, use the word equanimity, or do you use something else? How do you define that?
So one of my favorite things to do is to try to translate Shinzen's work on influence and model into my teaching. So I do use the word depending on the audience, but I also try to challenge myself to find synonyms or relatable terms depending on who the audience is. So like in a corporate setting, I might say something like composure. But what's key for me, and this is like, oh gosh, I do think that equanimity is a kind of a linchpin to this bigger puzzle of what I think of as trying to become more objective about my subjective experience. I think equanimity is a key there. And I think when I look out into the landscape of the mindfulness marketplace, the meditation, I feel like the emphasis stays on like psychological epiphanies, like big cognitive or intellectual breakthroughs, or like you're solving a puzzle, solving a riddle. And then a lot of the talk and quotes and discussion makes it sound like people are having equanimity with situations. And I feel that that's we're really talking about equanimity with sensation. So what do I mean? So if we think of, I think most people gravitate towards the term acceptance. And when they hear, be in the present, just let it go, have equanimity with this, what I think they start to hear is accept the situation. Life has its ups and downs, so just accept them. And I get it. And on one level, that's true. But there's some situations where acceptance is not available, right? And so what I have found is that where Shinzen's formulation of equanimity means there's this tendency for humans. We like things and we don't like things. If we like it, we want to grab a hold of it. And when we don't like it, we want to push it away. So there's this pushing and pulling or interfering on the inside. And somewhere right smack in the middle between pushing and pulling is this neutrality, which it's just aware without trying to change anything. Now, let's say, for example, you're stuck in traffic driving home from the eclipse. So we had an eclipse we had the path of the totality in our region. So a lot of people got stuck in traffic recently. I'm not encouraging people to just accept traffic, because I just feel like that it's kind of BS. It's like some people are able to do it, but I have my theories about that. But where Shinzen has changed the game for me is it's about having acceptance or equanimity with the sensations themselves. It's a relationship I'm developing, the capacity to see and hear and feel sound, sights, body sensations, but also hear myself think or see pictures in my mind or have an emotional explosion or complex stew of emotion. And I'm not trying to accept the situation. I'm trying to accept the sensations briefly, imperfectly. So even like, I think people think, there's the imagery, the stock images of meditation are stacked rocks, flexible women on beaches, yoga, whatever. And what I think of is much a better example would be like a tightrope walker, slack line walker, or, the guy walking across the World Trade Center on the tightrope up high in the wind. That's equanimity. And he's not having equanimity with walking a tightrope. He's having equanimity with this step, this breeze, this fear, this exhale, like the components of perception that we can take any situation and divide it into its component parts and develop a kind of clarity, right? Which Shinzen would say clarity, having this familiarity with all the things a person can perceive and putting aside temporarily what it all means, the content or meaning of it. So it doesn't help me. I know what traffic means, but what does it mean that my heart's beating faster, or that my face is getting hot, or that the car in front of me is not moving? It's like, I see the car, I see the cloud, I feel my heart beating, I feel my legs. It's just a very long answer to your equanimity question, but I feel like it's worth unpacking again and again, this idea that when we cultivate equanimity, so non-interference with a real-time sensation or perception, and that becomes habitual, then something like losing something or forgetting where I parked my car or finding out bad news about something my daughter got herself in trouble with, or finding out someone's got some horrible medical news, the equanimity has consistently but unpredictably bubbled up to feel like it's supporting the situation. But I'm not trying to force myself to accept the situation. I have found that I've had certain times where I had this shocking degree of peacefulness in the midst of a situation, not because I'm trying to do some mental gymnastics, but because my nervous system feels prepared to handle it or to digest it differently, to a degree where I've also felt, I have one particular memory having to do with parenting where I'm I get this I get this phone call. Anyway, I have to go to where my daughter is, and I'm terrified. This can't be news about my daughter. That's not my daughter. My daughter's an A student. What is this? Right? And yet I undeniably felt alive, safe. I felt held by and I don't think about it in these terms, but I cannot deny I had the experience of feeling held by something, which I would call the result of my practice and tapping into some human capacity that I don't think we know how to talk about without attributing it to, supernatural things and metaphors and then getting ourselves all confused by the metaphor. But I'm like, I feel safe and warm inside something, and I'm just floating to go receive my bad news. So times like these, I feel like I have such a beef about mindfulness as synonymous with relaxation or breath awareness. Yeah. I think, oh, brother, are we still really? It's that. Yeah. So anyway, it's so much more.
Yeah. I would love to unpack a bit more about the equanimity, because you mentioned like it's like pivotal, but I think you also touched upon which I think is interesting, is the aspect of my training, I'm guessing, and my thinking in terms of logical, down to earth, that side of things, and then the woo-woo experience of something other, which you can't explain, and it's having a foot in both, where one is not denying or pushing away the other. So, when you talked about the experience of being held, and, something really deep, but which you can't explain, that side of experience is also important. So I wonder if you had any thoughts on that.
I guess I can only couch it in terms of my own life and my own life experience. So how I frame it currently, it feels like a translation issue, that there's something that seems to evade language or conceptual understanding. But it's not entirely true. That's not entirely true. But to get any kind of conceptual understanding, you start using similes and metaphors, and people start talking about clouds going by, or, even creators or things. So, let's just say here I am, this little boy growing up in Wichita, Kansas, being told the literal, things about the Bible as history. So Jesus as historical figure, and miracles as real, and you literally ask Jesus to come into your heart, and then you're saved and you live forever in heaven. Right? And that's what I was told and believed. And then things caused me to bump up against the holes in that what I see now is somebody wise came up with a story, a poem, a simile, a story, to say, hey, you guys, there's something really special about being alive and being a human. And it has something to do with your feeling like you're the center of the universe. But then that's something you actually can't hold onto because of things like you're going to age, you're going to get sick, things are going to happen, right? So there's times when you are not able to hold that position of center of the universe. So they tell a story to convey some deeply human truth, some deep wisdom. And then I think humans I think it's inevitable. We take the poetry literally. Someone whose work has had an impact on me here is Karen Armstrong. I think she pronounces it Karen. She's a British writer who was a nun for a while. She wrote a book about fundamentalism in Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, and compared how the similarities across. And one of the things that struck me was that she talked about this trying to reconcile mythos and logos. So mythos contains valuable human information in the form of myth and story and poetry. And then logos is this logical side. And the problem is not. The problem comes when you try to reconcile them against each other. Use logos to understand mythos. It's never gonna parse out. But then I love this idea that there's value in logic and there's value in mythos, but just be careful trying to treat them the same, or be careful about the terms you use, and be careful about how you are taking something that has this ineffable truth to it. This makes me think of something that I think about quite a bit, which is I've come to think that wisdom is a thing. Like, wisdom doesn't need wise people or perfect people. So I can think about songs I heard, Bible songs, stories, encouragement, prayers, rhymes, things that kind of got into my viscera, hymns. There's a hymn from my childhood, which is every Sunday, probably twice, morning and evening, Just As I Am. The song Just As I Am, which if I hear it now, I have zero connection to it as a literal practice. If I hear that song now, I will probably weep if I don't have my guard up, right? But it conveys the essence of equanimity in it.
Yeah.
Can you accept this moment just as you are? It feels like something outside me is accepting me, but I feel like that's an inside job. Anyway, this wisdom piece, I feel like we're swimming in wisdom in the form of cliche, poetry, lines from religious texts, insights people share. But most of the time, people are just parroting things. They're just reciting it off as if it doesn't, maybe it's not even true. So like my whole Baptist upbringing, people were just repeating something they heard. So people would talk about the peace that passeth understanding, and they would just talk about it lightly. And I remember there came a time where I walked away from all of that belief system and then came crawling back into contemplative practice through meditation, and then eventually, retreats, and with Shinzen for years. And then I would have these moments like something terrible happens and I can't ignore the peace. I can't deny the peace that's infused in this terrible situation. And I remember thinking, oh no, like this is the peace that passeth understanding. And those people were passing on wisdom. They were just repeating it. They hadn't experienced it. They didn't really even know it was Sunday school teachers, whatever, singers. So I think it's fascinating that wisdom doesn't need us to understand it, to perpetuate it, sort of like we're planting these seeds. And I find that part of what makes equanimity such a valuable part of our practice is that it sets the stage for that willingness to drop logic and control, to drop the impulse to solve and fix and improve, and paradoxically, things feel more alive when I stop interfering habitually, when I habitually interfere less. But one of the things I find fascinating about that is it's like, I think people hear that and say, like, let's say I'm somewhere, I'm trying to think of an example. Like, I've been to some beautiful places and I realize the natural beauty around me is not making me happier. It's actually it's almost like the experience almost goes through me like a sieve, if that makes sense. It's almost like I'm just letting the beauty flow by as if it's not a big deal. I'm not trying to capture it and hold on to it forever. It's almost like the fleetingness of the pleasant moment is part of the experience of the richness that equanimity can prepare us for, in the same way that it helps us to fight less with the discomfort of being, instability of some kind of catastrophe. There's the paradoxical richness of being able to savor a pleasant sensation more makes pleasant moments come more alive. And fighting less on the inside with those inevitable unpleasant experiences makes me feel more alive, but not comfortable. But somewhere in there is that piece that people summarize into little fortune cookies and quotes and haiku. But the lived experience is just, I don't think anything can prepare us for the lived experience other than paying attention, habitually practicing, trying, giving our best shot. And I want to say there, I really mean it about if we try to interfere less, that's enough. That's enough. It's like, not like someday I will not interfere any longer. No. Your best effort is good enough today. Like, it's not like if I walk around the park 3 times, it's not like, well, someday I'll get better at walking around the park. No. You walked around the park. That's awesome. Great job. Perfect job. You don't need to do anything else to be a better walker. In the same way, mindfulness, I heard myself think, I heard the bird, I felt the relaxation, I felt the fear. I did the best I could. It's like the bar is so much lower than people realize when we start talking about equanimity. It's like your best effort to have equanimity with a present sensation. Your best effort that you're capable of right now is more than enough. Keep doing that. Keep practicing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense to me, but I think for a lot of people, unless you have an experience of that, it's really difficult to convey and express. And we can give examples and we can kind of have pointers. So, I mean, for you, because when I first came across the term equanimity, I'm thinking, what's that? Because concentration, that's simple enough. That's focus. Sensory clarity, you can work out a bit of what that is, but there is this mysterious term called equanimity, and it wasn't until I had an experiential experience
totally
then it kind of things clicked into place. So was there something for you when you when you came across the term with Shinzen? Did you have an experience where things clicked and then it seems like, oh, okay, so that's what it is. It happens, but I just didn't notice that. So yeah.
The place I go to, I would say I had little gradual appreciation of it. But where it started to really get my attention, I was having leg cramps while meditating on a retreat. And I asked Shinzen about it, and he suggested, because what I would do is either stand up or stretch or pinch my lip or do things, and I would have this happen in life, either meditating or in bed, whatever, right? But he said, can you let it build to a peak? Which sounds like a
Did you go,
terrible.
what?
Yeah, exactly. Terrible idea. But it sounded like he really sounded like he knew what he was talking about, and he seemed like, this is one of the things I appreciate about him, is it's like he's got the research and development in his own body. It's in his viscera, and he's just trying to describe it, right? And so I remember thinking, I can try. And how I've approached that, I'll try to tell how I approach it and why I think it's so significant. So it's sort of like my best effort has to be good enough, and that best effort can fluctuate over time. Some situations I'll have the willingness or ability, and some I won't. So I remember thinking, okay, here comes a leg cramp. And it wasn't like they were often enough for it to be it was like spread out randomly, right, over time. Just having the plan I'm going to practice, I felt like kind of reduced the chance that they would happen a little bit, right? Or I'd catch them sooner.
Yeah.
I would catch them and go, oh no, oh no, oh no, oh no, oh no, okay, 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 okay. Like that's how it was like, and that was my best equanimity. Is like, oh, 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 no, 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 no,
Yeah.
and then it would be like, okay. And I remember trying to analogy of like, let's say being hospitable to that family member who makes holidays difficult. I'm going to just be not, I mean, I'd prefer that you not come over, but here you are in your family. So I'll be nice to you. So I would extend this kind of civility or hospitality to the sensation, right? To the sensation itself. And then it would gradually become, I realized as soon as it's like let's say the discomfort is not there, suddenly appears, builds and builds and builds and builds and builds and builds, and I would wait too long to try. The more intense the discomfort, the harder it is to have equanimity with it. So I would realize, oh, I have to catch it sooner. So I would gradually catch it sooner and sooner, and then I would have this experience of I catch it as soon as I possibly can, do the best of my ability, let it build to a peak. When it builds to a peak, it absolutely shocking to me. On the other side, as soon as it peaks, no longer, I don't even know if I could call it uncomfortable. Now it's just like this delicious slide back down to gone, where the sensation is no longer even there. And it's like the muscle knew how to unpack its cramp if I got out of the way and just let it do it. So I'm resisting in this really subtle way, but if I can let it build to a peak. So then I got to the point where I can't claim to be on my game all the time. Sometimes not. But the less often it happens, the harder it is, where I can feel it start to begin. And now it feels like the best possible scenario is if I can just unironically throw open the door, like throw open the doors. Just do what you need to do. You're completely invite you here to do whatever you need to do. And it just like the builds to a peak quicker, the builds to a peak that's not as high, and I get to really relish in the dying down. Now, as we talk about that, to me, you and I know there's no reading, talking, diagramming is going to make that task easy. But it's a visceral to the willingness to even try, I think pays off. The big impact has been for me because of Shinzen's model has this, with the body, there's this physical that was clearly a muscle cramping. But I've got anger, fear, sadness, embarrassment, boredom. I've got all kinds of basic emotional flavors that are my own personal stew of if I'm overwhelmed, I might have 5 uncomfortable emotions firing at once. So in the same way I could practice letting my muscle cramp, can I let sadness build to a peak or embarrassment build to a peak? Just pick one at a time. I usually find one of them is sort of like the ringleader and the others are escalating, because if I can find one emotional type sensation or feeling, right? I think the word feeling makes sense there. Emotional feeling, to the best of my ability, let it build to a peak and subside. Game changer. If I don't think everyone, I've come to, as a coach, discover that not everyone has big, intense feelings that they can access. Some people have a much more logic-based experience of their life. And the emotions are lurking in subtle places within other places we can look. But for those of us who feel our feelings in a big way and have identified with those feelings as somehow part of our, personality, being able to untangle some of those strands and have equanimity with one at a time to ride out a wave that builds to a peak and subsides. I just think if people realize the power of that, it would be.
It's a game changer.
It's a game changer. It's a change relationship, change your career, change your relationship to your body. I just think it's huge, and it's like it's missing from the culture. I think it's probably missing from most cultures. This idea of a kind of self-awareness that is able to observe your own subjectivity with this kind of compassionate, almost like parental intimacy with your discomfort. It's just huge, and it's motivating to want to spread the word about that. But it's a tough sell because people want to just think about it instead.
Yeah, because as you're speaking, what's coming to me is there is that that allowing and really experiencing your emotions to tap into who you really are, and that also brings a kind of peace to be able to tap into yourself deeply.
Yeah, and I think that the thing I would help or encourage people to play with is to consider that even within the world of mindfulness meditation, there's a lot of messages, there's a lot of marketing, there's a lot of enticing stories, but they tend to be in the form of epiphanies, psychological breakthroughs. Like someone will say something about, I don't know, it's usually in the flavor of just letting something go. It is what it is, or just let it go, or you're not your feelings, or all that is true, but none of that matters if you don't try to apply it for yourself, not in the search for big breakthroughs, but simply curious about the experience of being alive itself. I feel like, I don't know if it's clear enough to be useful to people, but to say, instead of saying something I would post on Instagram, for example, about the relief that comes from yielding to life's challenges, or something a poet would say, all that's great. However, if I'm watching Netflix and it's the end of an episode and I'm suddenly hooked and I kind of want to watch the next episode, right there, I could notice I could maybe watch another episode or I might not, but I could feel the feeling that makes me want to go on to the next episode as part of my ongoing hobby of being fascinated by my own emotional reactions at this sensation level. The other thing I wanted to say, I find myself trying to encourage people who are newer to me to be on the lookout for equanimity that is spontaneous and that's, I believe, part of people's everyday lives, but we don't have language for it. We're not on the lookout for it. So like when your coffee is just the right temperature, there's just the right amount of cream or no cream, whatever. It's just that, those few perfect sips where you wouldn't change it, it's perfect. But what we do immediately is go on to thinking about some other problem that needs to be solved as opposed to tasting that coffee. Same with the perfect temperature of the shower, right? Or you step outside and the breeze is just perfect and delicious, or sun. If there's it's like, oh, there's no problem to solve here. What's at the top of my to-do list for solving problems about myself or the world? So one, I think, powerful thing that people can do kind of as a secret hobby to test out. You don't have to wait for your most uncomfortable emotion to practice equanimity. In fact, I wouldn't recommend it, right? Practice equanimity when it's the most easily accessible, which is also when it's easiest to overlook and undervalue. Because then, don't you think, Bob, it's like when you like, oh, wait, that's what he means? It's like you just, the light hits, your dog's sleeping on the couch and you watch them breathing and you're just like, oh, that's beautiful. And you're just there watching it.
Yeah.
That's a moment of equanimity with seeing, right?
Yeah.
So it doesn't have, it gets all this, in order to promote it, we talk about extremes, but it really is just like physical exercise. If I do a little low stakes practice with the material I have every day, it's just low hanging fruit that's really easily missed.
I really like that. Daron, we're coming up to the hour.
Okay.
I would love to invite you again for a second part. Would that be okay?
Oh, absolutely. Are you kidding?
Because I think I would like to talk more about the intentional fitness thing that you do. One of the things that you mentioned was libraries. And I would love to explore your relationship with libraries and how that means for you as well, because that would be interesting. So
yeah, and I actually got when I left mental health, I got a master's in library science, and I was a librarian while I was beginning to explore my mindfulness. So it's all woven together in there. So
yeah,
yeah,
okay.
I would love
So
it.
we'll have a second part.
Okay,
So Daron Larson, thank you very much, and we'll have a second episode.
I look forward to it. Thank you.
If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to help and support us, please like and subscribe below.